Our next speaker is Jan Davis, and Jan Davis has mounted solo exhibitions regularly since the late 1980s. Firstly with Niagara Galleries in Melbourne, and more recently with Graham Galleries and Editions in Brisbane, who continue to represent her work. She has been included in numerous group exhibitions nationally and internationally, and in 1995, her 7-volume artist book Solomon won the Fremantle Print Prize. Her works are in the collection of the National Gallery of Australia and Australian National Library, Canberra, as well as in many state and regional collections and private collections. You mustn't forget that. She studied printmaking at Phillip Institute in Melbourne and concluded her academic qualifications with a Masters of Art from Southern Cross University. She holds the position of Adjunct Associate Professor at Southern Cross University, following a 25 years academic career there, which involved both teaching in the printmaking studios and leadership roles. Her studio investigation into landscape and place is conducted through artist books, drawing and printmaking, including digital printmaking. She lives near Lismore, and she's constantly working in her garden. Please clap for Jan Davis.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for coming along. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Neville, for coming. I wanted just to tell you, in addition to Aki's little introduction there, that when I was at Phillip Institute in Melbourne, I was working with Danny Moynihan, who Stephen mentioned, and he was a terrific inspiration for me. And Danny's emphasis on black and white imagery really struck a chord with me and sort of prevails through a lot of my work now. So those traces are still evident. I wanted to start off by showing you some current work. So I've inverted Stephen's modus operandi here. This is a recent etching. I was fortunate enough in 2014 to have a studio in Venice for a fortnight, and it was a struggle because it was such a beautiful place. It was a struggle because most of the work I make is actually about my relationship to the landscape in which I dwell. And so in Venice, I was very much out of place. And so what I tried to do was to move my methodology, if you like, the way I feel my body in the landscape at my garden at Tory, to Venice. And in Venice, I was spending a lot of time travelling each day to the studio on a vaporetto. And if you've ever done those little boat trips, you'll know that when you get off the boat, it's almost like your whole body's full of water, like sloshing in a bottle. And so for half an hour, I'd have this total feeling. And these two etchings that I'll show you now were very much about that bodily sense of being unbalanced, if you like, in Venice. They're tiny little pieces because I was carrying my plates, of course, to work there, and just a little bit of chine collet and sugar lift. Prior to that, this is a body of work I made in 2011 for a show called Trace. This is a series of digital prints that was shown at Langford in Melbourne. They're based around a story that was doing the rounds, if you like, in the 1880s in Victoria. There was a myth of a white woman supposedly held captive by the indigenous tribes of East Gippsland. And I used that story, I guess, as an analogy for the way we are still coming to terms with our relationship to place. And I have to say, I grew up in East Gippsland, and when I was a small child, I knew of this story. It was a story I was told from the early days. And so people still, if you like, believe this story had currency, this myth had currency. The existence of the woman was in fact never proven, but the story was the impetus, if you like, for a series of search parties and terrible violence inflicted on Indigenous people. I made a series of prints about the landscape, and then I'll share the next one. This is called 2P Jackets, and this series of images is based on the newspaper reports that were first aired in both Melbourne and Sydney by the explorer Angus McLennan, who had come upon an Indigenous camp where the Indigenous people had fled, and he found in the camp a series of items of clothing, which I and others have referred to as McLennan's inventory. And so the objects which were found were the evidence, the very, very scant evidence of the existence of the white woman, but they were enough for the community to become quite outraged, and, as I say, a series of search parties. So to highlight the sort of contemporary currency of that story, if you like, I made a series of prints based on the objects in the inventory. So there was actually 2P jackets in that inventory. There was one German frock in the inventory. And I've imagined the frock. It was imagined that the woman may have been a shipwreck victim. And so in the making of this print, I've imbued her, if you like, with this sort of maritime feeling. These prints, these digital prints, measure about a metre high by about 80 in breadth. This is not directly from the inventory, but it's from the story. This print is called Incident at Jemmy's Point. There was, in the years following the search parties, the body of a woman found drowned at Jemmy's Point, near the current lake's entrance in East Gippsland. And this print is actually about the discovery of that body, and the sort of wrapping suggests, if you like, the sort of secrecy around the story. Again, the McLennan, Angus McLennan, again had his finger in this pie in the finding of the body, and the story of the finding, the discovery of the body, and the publication of the story finished the search parties. But by that stage, the extension of land settlement is quite significant through that East Gippsland area. Solomon was mentioned. This was the work that won the Fremantle Print Prize in 1995. It was also the work that I made as part of my master's project at Southern Cross University. This was the first digital work to win the Fremantle Print Prize, and it was among the first books to win the Open Prize. This book is in the collection of the State Library of Queensland, and there are images of it on my website, but I actually haven't brought them here today because I didn't think I'd have time to show you those. This is a print. This print is in the National Gallery in Canberra. This was one of my first digital prints, and this was made after a trip to Guangzhou in 1995. And I went with a group from RMIT, and I went to learn Chinese brush painting. And it was a very, very significant trip, and I had no idea at the time, because in the brush studio, we had very large brushes. We're in the southern part of China. They used a lot of water, they said, because of the wet climate. Their paintings were wet. And we were taught by copying from traditional Chinese paintings on fans. And we had the fan shape to work on, the cut paper, and the brushes, and they were too big and they were too wet. But what's very interesting is that the work that I'm making now, some whatever years later, the brushwork is still a really very significant part of it. Am I 10 minutes up? 1 minute. This was made using the principles of Qi that we were taught how to put the compositions together on the fans. These were photographs that I took on slides. I don't think there were digital cameras when I was there. These were old slides put onto whatever, using the composition of chi to make the fan, and then they were folded. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan.